What's up, nutrition nerds, and welcome back to another video. And in this one, we're going to talk about how to fuel multiple workouts in the same day. This is something that I consider as part of the fundamentals of training. If you can get your nutrition right over the long term, then you're going to reap the benefits of your hard work. As the purpose of this channel is to give you the information to use in your training, we're going to cover some different scenarios, but you're going to come up with a fueling plan. The energy needs for an athlete who's training multiple times in a day is clearly more than someone who's just training once a day or maybe even once every other day. To start with, let's just cover some basics to give you some context. When we exercise, our body has two main sources that provide energy: fats and carbohydrates. The amount of fat or carbohydrate that we use in exercise is mostly to do with exercise intensity. As a general rule of thumb, the easier the exercise, the greater contribution of fat to provide energy. The more intense the exercise, the greater the contribution of carbohydrate to provide the energy. I've explained this concept of exercise intensity and its relation to what fuel we use to supply energy in separate videos on fats and carbohydrates. So if you would like to know about this in more detail, then you can just head over and watch those videos. But for now, we just need to understand that when we do harder or more intense exercise, we use more carbohydrates. And actually, when we're working really hard, we only use carbohydrates and no fats. We've got a store of carbohydrates in our body, and it's stored as something called glycogen. And we use up this glycogen store when we exercise and just in normal day-to-day activities. The rate we use up that store also depends on intensity. The harder we work, the quicker we use that store up. If it's hard but steady exercise, then we've got enough stores for about 90 to 120 minutes of exercise. But if it's super hard, like repeated bike or run sprints, then we can actually use it up much quicker. You can reach critically low levels of muscle glycogen in about 20 minutes and essentially deplete your stores. And if you run out of carbs, you can't do high intensity exercise very well, and you'll feel pretty awful overall. With regards to fat, in terms of exercise capacity and our stores, it's essentially limitless. Carbs run out, fats don't. So with the understanding of these three things, when we work harder, we use more carbohydrates compared to fats. The harder we work, the quicker we use up our carb stores, and our carb stores can run out, but our fat stores can't. I can give you the principles to manage your own nutrition to fuel your exercise. Now, this is a bit of a catch-all and nutrition isn't the same for everyone, but these principles can give you the basic understanding and you can then play around a bit or let me know in the comments if you've got any questions. And while we're on that, if you haven't already, just give the video a like and press subscribe because it really helps me to know what you're interested in. So let's get into the fueling part of things. We'll go through some scenarios and I want you to consider what fueling and nutrition plan we need. Okay, so this is your first one. Think about the principles that I talked about, and I've put them on the screen so that you can use them. What's the fat or carbohydrate contribution for this? Do you need to worry about your carbohydrate stores running out and what you eat throughout the day? Got your answer? So if it's 2 easy sessions, your carbohydrate need isn't going to be as great throughout the day because you'll be using a mixture of carbohydrates and fats when you exercise. So your nutrition between your sessions doesn't need to be as heavily focused on carbohydrates. Your meal should in general still contain carbohydrates because it's worth keeping your stores topped up and the complex carbohydrates are just generally good for us. But our carbohydrate need isn't as great as when high intensity is involved. You don't want to be focusing on what we call simple carbohydrates here. The carbohydrates which are usually found in sports supplements like drinks, gels or bars, or in refined breads or sweets. Instead, focus on whole grain or slower digested carbohydrates like wholemeal breads or pastas. So this is your next scenario. What do you need to think about here? What's your consideration for carbohydrates over the course of the day or after your session? So as we've already been through, the morning workout shouldn't use up too much of your carb stores if it's just an easy session. We'll still use some carbohydrates in it and we naturally use them throughout the day. So it's still important to eat carbohydrate-rich foods throughout the day and focusing on the complex ones. But we know in that second high intensity session, we're going to need to use carbohydrates. So it's especially important to keep them topped up throughout the day. So on to the third scenario. Alright, so this one is a little bit different. We're going to assume that this high intensity session is after breakfast. The reason I say this is because it's not a good idea to do your high intensity sessions fasted. I will cover that in future videos, but for now you'll just have to take my word for it. In terms of what you eat for breakfast, this isn't as important. Just eat what you normally would and what you know works well for you. If you'd like to know what I eat for breakfast, then just click the video at the top of the screen about pre-race nutrition. So for this scenario, what are your thoughts? You've got about 10 seconds before we move on. This is a great time to consider what we call simple carbohydrates. These carbohydrates are easy to absorb, and because they are easily absorbed, they help to rapidly refill the glycogen content in our muscles, meaning we can go again for the next session, meaning we're ready to go again for the next session. So your focus here should be on a source of simple carbohydrates as soon after your high intensity session as possible. And it's important to continue to eat carbohydrate-rich meals before your next session. And after that initial meal or snack that contained lots of simple carbohydrates, it's then worth aiming for a mix of simple and complex carbohydrates if you know you've got another hard session later in the day. Now, I wouldn't necessarily advocate for having 2 hard sessions in a day, but it's a simple fact that it happens. Your best bet to be able to make sure you perform well in both of them is to start replenishing your carbohydrate stores as soon as possible and keep on going with that throughout the day. This is the final one to cover. By now, I reckon you nutritional nerds have got this, so we're not going to spend long on it. The answer to this is the same as the previous scenario, but you can tone it down a bit. You don't need to go as crazy on the simple sugars as the last one, and you don't need to focus so heavily on carbohydrates, because the next one is just an easy session, but it's still worth keeping carbs in your meals. Now, this scenario is actually a really interesting one, because there could be another nutritional strategy here that we could use to improve our training. This strategy revolves around training in a low glycogen or low carbohydrate state to try and improve your fat burning capabilities. But it's one to give you all of the information on properly, so I'm going to do a detailed video on it for you. If you're interested in that, then press the subscribe button and you'll get notified when I release it. But for now, the information that I've given you in this video will help you to train more consistently over the long term and reduce your risk of injury, illness, or burnout. And so that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you found it useful, and let me know if you've got any questions. Until next time, see ya.